Well, if you're expecting some great Damascus Road story or some inspiring story that, like, Suzanne puts on the YouTube videos all the time, I don't have one. Sorry. If you know me, that's just not the way I work. Things develop in me slowly over time. I'm much more logical, considered, things like that. And as I tell Suzanne, I'm just not prone to sappiness. It just doesn't work for me. But my story is a lot like yours. I grew up going to church. Mom drove me to church as a child, reluctantly. And I have vivid memories, like most of you, about Mom giving me a quarter to put into the offering plate. And I still remember that the selfish kid in me wanted to keep that quarter. But Mom was always watching, so that quarter always went into the offering plate. And it was whatever church was closest to the house that we were living at. So, it wasn't any one denomination. If you're curious, most of it was Methodist, though. But no great lessons learned there. Sorry, it's just okay. That's what happened. Fast forward a couple of years, though. I was 18, I joined the Air Force and went off to serve. And I didn't even bother going to church until my first wife and I met a guy at work who started a home church. And he invited us to come, and we started going to this home church out of friendship to him. And I learned two things from that church. The first thing was, this guy was an absolute nutjob fundamentalist who believed that women ought to cover their heads in church and things like that. That's why we stopped going. It was just silly. But the other thing that I learned, and Suzanne hasn't corrected me on this, so I'm pretty sure it's true, is that passage in Malachi where it talks about that's the only place in the Bible where God challenges us to test him, to put him to the test. Thinking, really? You're kidding me. The creator of the universe, the God who destroyed the world in 40 days and 40 nights of floods, who destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, the whole Old Testament bit. This God is challenging me to put him to the test? Okay, why not? I'll give it a try. So we left that home church and we started going to whatever generic Protestant service was at the base that we were stationed at. Got quite an eclectic mix. You were Church of Christ, Seventh-day Adventist, Lutherans, the whole nine yards. It was just generic service. But I started writing a check out every Sunday. But like most of us, remember, some of us are doing now, raising a family, raising two boys, it was expensive. And there wasn't always enough money in the checking account to cover the check that, I intended to write on Sunday morning. This wasn't there. So we didn't write a check that Sunday morning, if there wasn't anything in the account. And we didn't think a thing about it. That was completely normal. Well, fast forward a couple more years, and we moved down to Omaha. And my first wife wanted to start attending this Lutheran church that was like her church back home, and I eventually wound up joining. And the pastor there had several really challenging sermons. One is, Suzanne's already talked about, the forgiveness sermon, but the other sermon that he talked about was first fruits giving. And I thought, first fruits giving, what the heck is that? Well, the way he described it, most of us, myself included, were practicing what's called leftover giving. We gave to God on Sunday morning whatever was left over in our wallets or whatever was left over in our checking account. And he said that wasn't scriptural. Scripture calls for us to give from our first fruits to God. I said, okay, well, how do you do that? He went on to explain that what he and his wife do is they figure out at the beginning of the year how much they're going to give to the church based on their income and their expenses. They decide at the beginning of the year how much they're going to give. And then every month when they write out their bills, they write the check out to the church first. And they put that aside, and that goes into the Sunday morning offering plate, and they learn to live on the leftovers. And I thought, well, gosh, that sounds awfully familiar. It sounds like what my grandfather used to teach. My grandfather immigrated from Germany in 1939. Seemed like a very good time to get out of there. But he had a couple of sayings about finances that stuck with me. The first one was, pay cash or do without. And the other one was, he said, live 10% below your means. so you'll have enough for the lean times. Wow, that sounds a lot like that first fruit giving and tithing thing. Well, it kind of resonated with me. If I learned to live 10% below my means, I'd have a surplus, and I could give that surplus back to God. Well, like most of us, still raising those 2 boys, they were still sucking on the income, so I couldn't tithe. Like many of us, I couldn't. But what I started doing was, I started putting the money aside at the very beginning of every month, and said, here's how much I'm going to put aside, here's how much I think I can afford. And I learned to live on the rest. And, you know, nowadays it's not like you have to write the check anymore. I mean, you can do electronic bill pay, and Lutheran Financial Services makes that easy. Heck, you can even tell your bank to go ahead and debit your account every month at a certain time for a certain amount. And it's far easier today than it used to be. But we started giving. And what I noticed over the years was that as I was faithful to God, God was in turn faithful to us and blessed us. It wasn't always perfect. I mean, after all, I am talking about my first wife, and Suzanne's my second. And, you know, I still get these overdue notices from the bills, so it's not perfect. But God is blessing me more than I had ever anticipated. So there's got to be something that this first fruit's given, after all. But that does bring you to the question of why you give in the first place. And that's a very personal question to a lot of people. For some of us, though, giving is a habit. And we grew up with it. It's what you do. For some of us, there's a practical aspect to giving. We like keeping the electric lights on. We like keeping the church heated. For some of us, there's a mission aspect of it. We like what the church does. We like the outreach that the church does for us. So we want to contribute to do that. To me, it's a little bit more personal than that. Over the years, it hasn't been perfect. But to me, what's happened is it's a response. Personally, it's a response to what God has done for me in my life. The fear is still there. I mean, the fear is always going to be there. The fear that you're not going to have enough. Anybody who reads the news these days knows that sequestration is a reality. Or could be a reality if the President and the Congress can't come to consensus. Well, that means that the government's going to take some big budget cuts, and Department of Defense employees like me stand a real chance of getting furloughed. So that fear tells me that I should stop giving to the church, and I should take that money and put it in the bank so that in case I'm furloughed, I've got money to tide me over while I'm looking for a job. But the funny thing about fear is you can't let it run your life. If you let fear control your life is soon out of control. Do you know I'm afraid of heights? Terrified of heights. But I won't let it stop me from flying my airplane. And I remember learning how to scuba dive standing on the back edge of that boat, knowing that the water was 40 feet deep. And I'm not a good swimmer, and I got 60 pounds of gear strapped to it. I'm convinced that when I jump off the end of this boat, I'm going to sink to the bottom and drown. But the other side of my brain is telling me, no, your gear, your equipment works, techniques, the things that people taught you all work. You're going to be fine. So I stepped off the end of that boat, and I didn't even get my hair wet. I didn't even sink that far down into the water. So I guess my point is that fear of not having enough can keep you from contributing to the church or to increase your giving. But I would ask you to consider not letting that fear control you. I don't have a particularly inspiring story, no Damascus Road experience, like I said. But what I do have is 35 years of observation that as I've been faithful to God, God's been faithful to me. He hasn't failed me yet.